Hi there. My name is Alan Baker, uh, and as you heard, I was a member of Branch 54 until I moved to Folsom 3 years ago. So, hello, old friends. I'm still the state webmaster for SIR, and I work with branch webmasters like Ken around the state. He's doing a great job, by the way. Your branch website is far superior to most. And just as a little bragging point here, a few months ago, I was awarded a SIR honorary life membership for my work with technology in SIR. Um, and speaking of Branch 54, it was Branch 54 that got me started doing these presentations about internet fraud. Um, Several years ago, at a Branch 54 meeting, a member told me that he got a phone call from Microsoft, and they told him that his computer had a virus and that they would fix that problem if he would just give them his credit card number and access to his computer. Um, um, John, could you mute uh, Surf 004, please? You can imagine how that played out because he got a bogus charge, a bunch of bogus charges on his credit card, and they added malware to his computer. And I won't say who this was, but I noticed he was in the crowd today. But so thank you for the experience. You got me started on a good path. And since that time, I've been working with SIR branches, giving presentations like this, and also with AARP Fraud Watch, giving presentations. So let me do a share screen, and I'll bring up the presentation itself. How are we doing? Can you see that? Okay. Our notion of computer hacking used to be a teenager tapping a keyboard in his mom's basement. But today things are different. Today's bad guys are highly organized criminal gangs that operate out of boiler rooms like you can see on this slide. They are professional fraudsters who will steal from anyone they can. Many of them are in foreign countries and beyond the reach of American law. So we must rely on ourselves and our friends to stay clear of these scammers. The internet can be a scary place, but my goal today is not to scare you, but to share information about the scammers, how they operate, and then give you some real actionable information that you can share with your family and friends. And today we're going to talk about three things. Firstly, phishing with a PH, not the kind where you go out in the boat. It's how scammers try to trick us into doing something we wouldn't otherwise do. And secondly, about data brokers and how they and scammers invade our privacy by tracking our online activity on the internet, and then how we can reduce that tracking. And finally, how to keep our passwords safe from the bad guys on the internet. So first, phishing. The bad guys want to trick us into doing something we wouldn't otherwise do. For example, give up personal information or click a link, and they are very good at it. These are professionals. They do this all day long for a living. But our parents taught us to be trusting and to trust people, and scammers try to take advantage of our trusting nature. Remember that scam tech support call that I mentioned earlier from Microsoft? In that example, the scammers used several techniques to gain our trust. First of all, they pretend to be an authority figure like Microsoft. But of course, in reality, we don't know them at all. Another hook is that they say this is a situation that has to be resolved right away, a sense of urgency. They want to get our emotions up. And actually, it turns out that there's no urgency at all. And finally, they call us. We did not ask them for their help. They are just calling us, and as it normally turns out, it's just cold calls randomly contacting people. So these are red flags to watch for. Don't trust the scammer. Don't engage the scammer. Just hang up if it's a phone call, or delete their message if it's on email or text. So we get a lot of phishing attacks by email. I'm sure everybody gets them every day. If you have email at all, you'll find your inbox just full of these. This email's text says that my Facebook account has been hacked, and to reinstate my account, I should complete the attached form or click on the link below. Sounds legit, but do you see some red flags in this email? Most importantly, Facebook, the name at the top of the page says Facebook support. But the sender's actual email address is not facebook.com. It's from akenoliotiong.co.uk. And this email address may not even be visible on your phone or tablet as it is on a computer. So if in doubt, set that email aside until you can check it out on your computer. But this is the number one way to identify phishing emails, is take a close look at that sender's email address. The second thing is to mouse over the link. Like in this case, I put the mouse on your Facebook profile, which causes its real internet address to show at the bottom of the page of the web browser. And again, it's not Facebook. And again, you can't do this on a Facebook or on a phone or tablet. So if in doubt, set that aside until you can look at it with your computer. But this one says that if you click that, your Facebook profile, it's going to go to deviate.oliotong.co.uk.web.campaign, something, 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 not Facebook. And last but not least, the attachment called facebook.zip. That's a zip file that may be hazardous to your computer's health if you don't know for sure it's something that you want. So if you see any of these red flags in your emails, probably phishing, and just discard them. Don't reply, just throw them away. So now let's take a moment to talk about tracking. Have you ever entered an internet search about some topic like blood pressure, and suddenly you see ads related to blood pressure? Pretty creepy, right? Well, that's because data brokers are tracking us and collecting information about us and selling it without our permission. They plant their third-party cookies on our computers and tablets and phones, And then they harvest that information about us as we move from website to website. Their business is selling our information to online retailers who show us online ads, and they may sell it to scammers who try to defraud us. So we want to minimize the amount of tracking that these data brokers can do. Now, in a more perfect world, data brokers would have to ask our permission, but in the US, it is perfectly legal for them to harvest our personal information without our permission. Fortunately, there are some software tools that are available to us to reduce the amount of our data that these data brokers can collect. So here's some rhetorical questions for you. What company is the #1 harvester of your personal information on the web? Rhetorical answer, Google. And what company was recently fined hundreds of millions of dollars for deceptive privacy practices related to tracking? Google. And what company provides Chrome, the most popular web browser on the internet? Google. Now, I believe that Google is probably more interested in collecting my personal data than they are in my privacy. So that's one reason that I use the Firefox web browser, which prevents storing third-party tracking cookies on my computer. I use a second tool that's a tracker blocker called Privacy Badger. And it was created by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is an organization that is all about privacy on the web. And Privacy Badger blocks any tracker that it sees more than twice. It logs it and says, okay, that's it. No more tracking for you, bud. So that's another good one to get, Privacy Badger. And last but not least, I also use an ad blocker called uBlock Origin. Although any ad blocker is good and will do similar things, this prevents those distracting third-party ads from popping up in my web browser and the dancing people and just distracting stuff. But it also blocks known phishing websites. So I recommend these 3 tools to you to help you in reducing the amount of tracking and fraud on your computer and your internet. And I'm going to take just a moment here and call for questions if in case you have some questions so far. And John, I guess if you'd help to unmute and pass around the mic, and maybe somebody's got a question. I'm going to stop sharing for us just a moment. I see that the host is still muted, so I'm not sure whether anything's happening there.
Right now.
Okay, now I hear it. Okay, any questions?
No.
Okay.
Can you hear me, Alan?
Yes, I do. Go ahead.
I have a Chrome browser, and I've been wondering. It's a nice, convenient thing, but my friends Google, who you just told me are one of the biggest offenders, they store all my passwords. So wherever I go, the Chrome browser says, "Oh, here's the password you need for the site." How dangerous is that? Having Google store your passwords?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm actually going to talk about that later in the presentation. So the short answer for now is that it's not dangerous because they're not storing it on their servers. It's being stored on your computer. But there is a better way because the passwords that are stored in your computer may or may not be encrypted and safe from anyone who hacks into your computer. So later on, I will talk about password managers, which perform the same function, but in that environment, in the password manager environment, it's secure and it's encrypted and it does some other things for you as well. So hold that thought and we'll come back to that in a few minutes. Other questions?
I look forward to that in the future.
Alan, does Privacy Badger or uBlock Origin work on an iPad?
I don't know. Let's see. So you would be using Safari. I think there's a good chance of it. I don't know personally because I don't have an iPad, but I'm guessing that yes, they do. And I'm pretty sure that Firefox is also available on the iPad. But check with your app store for the iPad and just look for those names.
Any other questions?
Okay.
One more.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
The question is, Kurt, there's a thing called the Norton antivirus and Norton LifeLock. What is your take on those? Because they're not cheap, about $350 a year just for a Norton antivirus / LifeLock. What is your take on that?
Right. Good question. I don't use those. A decade ago, the Norton and other similar antivirus companies did have some benefits that you would not otherwise receive by just using the standard antivirus that comes with Windows. However, things have changed over the last decade, and the antivirus that comes with Windows is very it's at least as good as Norton and some other ones. What's happened over the last decade is that Microsoft has cranked down on applications that interact with Windows, and ultimately Norton Antivirus is a Windows application. It's not a part of the operating system. And so it can inadvertently do some bad things, or it can get corrupted. There are a number of problems with having third-party antivirus programs nowadays. I don't recommend them. I would just go with the one that comes with Windows. I've found it really helpful. On the other hand, don't rely on your antivirus tool to keep you safe. Use your own good common sense because it's only one layer of defense.
Right.
So,
and some of the things, because this is Larry, I have both the Microsoft, because I use that format, but I also have McAfee, and I found there is some conflict between it. I've heard that McAfee is supposed to be one of the better antivirus and protection programs with Norton and others. But have you had any experience with the McAfee system?
right. McAfee, Norton, and Microsoft all do a good job. They're all very comparable. However, there's no particular advantage today in having McAfee or Norton versus the one that comes with Windows. And if you have both running, as you observed, Larry, that is going to cause you problems. So regardless of which one you do use, only use one.
All right, so that's a good point. That's a good point.
Could I say something, Alan?
Go for it.
So I use something called WebRoot, which was used by banks at one point, and they've been bought later by another antivirus company. And one of the problems, I had used to use Kaspersky, but that's got a lot of bad press because it's more of a Russian-sounding name, and it is from Russia. As I tried to use McAfee and had bad experiences. In fact, the company I was working at, they pushed out a buggy version of the antivirus, and the whole company shut down for 2 days while we waited for them to push a patch out. And they never fixed it for the consumers. It was only corporate people that got it fixed for. So using an antivirus tends to be very exciting, I've noticed.
That's an interesting word for it. But your situation you described is exactly what I was alluding to earlier, where these third-party antivirus companies they're having a harder and harder time making it work at all with Microsoft Windows. It's actually kind of an unnatural act that they can work at all today because Microsoft has tightened down the screws quite a bit on the operating system to keep malbehaving applications from interfering with Windows. And that's another reason that I just go with the plain old internet antivirus that comes with Microsoft Windows. Works great, stays out of the way. I don't have to think about it.
Yeah, now I had other problems with antiviruses beyond the WebRoot, is I'm using a RAID storage device for my systems, and it hated booting off a RAID storage device, and I literally was forced to use WebRoot as it was the only one that would coexist with a RAID system disk.
Wow. Well, yeah, not very many people have that sophisticated a setup with RAID, but your point is good that when you go beyond the totally standard vanilla one disk kind of world, it introduces all kinds of complexities that some other applications and antivirus companies are not really able to deal with well. Any other questions before I proceed to the next section? Yes, I heard somebody's voice.
Yeah, this is Horace. What about DuckDuckGo privacy? Have you had experience with that?
Are you speaking of the DuckDuckGo browser, or are you speaking of DuckDuckGo search?
No, the browser.
And the search too.
Well, I'd say both of them are good. They are actually one of the few outfits that cares about privacy. I mentioned that the Firefox browser was interested in privacy. There are a few others like DuckDuckGo that are really interested in your privacy. And so, yeah, if you would prefer using DuckDuckGo, I think that's a good browser to go with. It has some functional limitations that you don't find in some other browsers, but it's very privacy forward. And similarly, the DuckDuckGo search engine, they don't store and track where you go on the web.
It works on an iPad.
Cool.
That's
Then go for it.
to point out. Make sure that your computers are up to the latest versions and updates of whether it's the Microsoft or the Apple. Because if you don't have the latest updates, you are not being protected to the best of their ability.
Absolutely right. And that's not only true for your phone, your computer, your tablet. your web browser, your operating system, but it's also true for a lot of other things that have embedded computers in them, like your internet router. And these days, your camera, your car, your refrigerator, all kinds of things have computers in them. And if possible, update those. Some of them will update automatically. Generally, our phones and computers these days are pretty good at updating automatically, but some are not. So if you can get to those manufacturers, check and see whether you have the latest version. So I'm going to move on with the next share, and we'll stop again at the end for more questions.
One last quick question. I'm not,
Okay.
but I do have a device where I store all my private files out on this independent device rather than letting them store in the CPU, and I try to stay away from the cloud. Am I any safer storing all my files out in this independent device?
It depends on what you mean about storing them. If you're talking about a backup environment where you can disconnect that device from your computer,
Yes.
it's offline, then yes, that is the safe way to go. If on the other hand, you leave it online and connected, it's just another disk that the operating system can see. And if the bad guys get into your computer's main disk, they can also get into that one. So for backups, yes, do the backup and then disconnect it and you'll be good.
Good point. You've got to take those things offline to have them protected, and that's a good way of backing up your data, and then if you do get hacked, you can recreate all of that stored data onto your computer when you refresh. Correct, Alan?
That's correct. And that's a really important point. If things go horribly wrong, it's really good to have a fallback. And if you have a complete backup of your environment on one of these little $100 USB external drives, you can restore in a matter of an hour. Otherwise, your life is going to be miserable. So I'm a big advocate of just what you're describing. Back everything up, not just your pictures and text documents, back everything up on your computer onto an external drive, then disconnect it. And when that awful time comes again, you'll be glad you did.
Alan, on security, I have a interesting bit of news for you. The state of Kansas is being held for ransomware as we speak. The court system in Kansas was locked down as of September of last year, and all their computers are currently offline waiting for a payment of multi-millions of dollars for the state of Kansas.
Yeah, poor security can lead to really, really bad situations. And the way these get started is often through a phishing attack that we've just discussed, or through lousy passwords, which we're going to talk about next.
Excuse me, could I ask one quick question? How often should we back up those things offline, and how often, and let's say frequency of backup, and is there additional, what do you call it, security you need on your backup on your backup data?
Okay. Regarding the second part of that, is there additional security that you need? No. If you back up to an external drive, hey, I'll show you mine. I have it right here. This is a little $100 external backup drive, and I back up everything on my computer to that. And then I put it in my desk drawer. And For most people, that is sufficient. Now, as for how to back it up, you want to use software that truly backs up everything on your computer. And that's not the way all backup programs work. So when selecting software, do check and make sure that it's something that will back up everything, so that if things go horribly wrong, you can restore from bare metal a completely wiped, empty disk. And the first part of that about how often, that is a question of how frequently your information changes and how much can you afford to lose. So
Right.
if you're working on your PhD thesis and you are grinding away on it and you can't afford to lose anything, you need to back up frequently, maybe say every day or continuously. On the other hand, for most people, once a week is probably enough. It just depends on how much you can afford to lose.
And how often you use the web to browse. Good point.
Okay, I'm going to move ahead here, and if you will mute the
Al?
host, and I will be back in a few minutes with an opportunity for more questions. So let's talk about passwords. That's a topic we love to hate. They're a pain in the butt, frankly, but they can also save your butt. So let's talk about the difference between weak passwords and strong passwords. Here's a story about what happens when you use an easy to remember password. Last summer, I got an email from my friend Tom asking if I could do him a favor and buy some gift cards for him because he was out of town, and then send him the numbers to a different email address. He'd pay me back when he got into town. And does this sound familiar to anybody? Have you heard this scam before? Yeah, it happens a lot. The gift card scam is one of the most popular on the internet. But how did this happen? How did the scammer get into his email account? Well, Tom had a weak password, and the scammer was able to use some software tools to guess that correctly. The scammer then logged in to Tom's account, sent that scam email from his account to everyone in his address book. So it looked like the email came from Tom because it did come from his account. Well, Tom didn't even know that a scammer was effectively sharing his email account until I contacted him, because I got the email and I knew this was fishy. So he called his email provider and tried to get control back of his email account, but he couldn't prove to the email provider that he was legit and that the scammer was a scammer. And so, because he could not prove that, the email provider left that account in control of the scammer. And Tom ended up having to get an altogether new email account. And then he started getting calls from his friends. Two of them had already bought the gift cards, as he had asked them to do. They were good friends, and sent the gift card numbers to the other email account, just as he had asked them to do. Well, not really. But Tom was understandably embarrassed that he had allowed his friends to be defrauded, by the way, at $250 a pop for these gift cards. And Tom wanted to notify everybody in his address book about the scam and let them know that it was a scam, don't be defrauded. But the scammer, who was a professional at this, had already deleted his address book. So Tom didn't even have his friends' email addresses to send a warning to. Fortunately, this didn't go into complete identity theft, but this mess happened because Tom had an easy to remember but weak password. And John, can you mute the host microphone, please?
There's a question for you.
Can I hold the questions until a couple slides down the road, please?
Yes.
Thank you. So what makes a password strong? Well, for starters, today, a password should be at least 12 characters, preferably longer. So here's some passwords to look at, to consider. How about the word hypothetically as a password? It has 14 characters, which seems long enough. But automated word list searches make it possible to guess this dictionary word almost like that. Not a good password. Don't use a dictionary word, a single word. What about substituting numbers and symbols for letters? A lot of clever people do this. So in the second example, I substituted a 0 for an O and slashes for the A and ones for L's. Does that help? No, not at all. The bad guys aren't trying to crack our passwords manually. They have programs that do this, and they have lookup tables and automated word lists, and these substitutions are already included in their dictionaries. So how long would it take to crack this password? Just like that, instantly. So how about that third one? Completely random characters. Well, that's actually an improvement over the others because it's totally random, if a bit short. That one could be cracked in about 40 minutes. Better than instantly, but not good enough. I believe that the best approach is to use a passphrase. For example, correct horse battery staple is 4 words and 25 characters long. So it would take decades for a random, for password cracking software to crack this. Now, don't use that particular one because that comes from an XKCD cartoon that's all over the internet, but it's a good example. Now, of course, many websites require that you use a capital letter, a number, or a special symbol. They have their own particular rules. So the last example incorporates those as well. So I'm a fan of passphrases like this, and I think they're a great way to introduce the length and complexity that you need. And they're much easier to type in than those random characters in the third example. So should we use the same password for different accounts? You remember my friend Tom, whose friends got scammed because he used a weak password? Well, Tom also made a second mistake. He used the same password on other accounts because it was convenient, including his bank account. So now the scammer that had access to his email also had access to his bank account. And when I learned this, I drove over to Tom's house and drove him to the bank so that we could get this fixed before the scammer could empty his bank account. So that's a good example of why it's a bad idea to use a password in two places. But there's another reason as well. Servers where these passwords are stored are frequently breached, and their customers' passwords get stolen in those breaches. And in recent years, there have been many servers breached. So Facebook, Yahoo, LinkedIn, lots and lots of websites have lost control of their passwords. And guess what? Those lost passwords end up in a database of passwords for the scammers. And if your password was among one of those on one of those sites that was breached, the bad guys now have your passwords.
That's all on the dark web.
And if you reuse the password elsewhere, they have all that they need to take over that account as well. So, bad idea to reuse passwords. Some people don't seem to be interested enough in security. They use one password for everything. Terrible, terrible idea. My friend Tom almost lost his limited financial resources that way. A related one here is single sign-on. Many websites encourage you to use single sign-on with using Facebook or Google or Amazon or Apple, like it shows on the slide. It's convenient, but it's yet another way that, first of all, companies track you across the web, because when you log in with Facebook on, say, two places, each time you do, that goes into the data broker's database of where you've been. And then they sell your information about the different places that you've gone to. And if the bad guys breach one of these sites, they have your password for multiple websites that you visit. So when you see these single sign-on things appear on a website, don't use it. Go ahead and create your own unique password for that website. So where do you store these passwords? Well, if we're going to have unique passwords, you're going to have a lot of them. And if we're going to have long, strong passwords, they're going to be really hard to remember and type them in. So first of all, let's consider, to whom are your passwords at risk? Are they at risk to criminals out on the internet? Or are they at risk to people that are in your house? Well, of course, criminals on the internet are a much bigger threat than the people that are in your house. So where should you store your passwords? Well, how about a file on your computer? Not so good, because if a bad guy out on the internet hacks into your computer, gets to your disk, he has all your passwords from that file. How about a sheet of paper in your desk drawer? That's actually not so bad, because it's more secure, because the bad guys on the internet cannot look in your desk drawer. Only people in your house could. And generally speaking, you trust the people that are in your house. This whole security business is about, who do you trust? Don't trust the people on the web. But there's an even better solution. How about a password manager? Does anybody in this room use a password manager? I can't see your faces and see your hands, but I do see somebody putting up one, so that's great. Whoever put their hand up on this one, that's the smartest guy in the room. Password managers are really helpful. They can generate a strong password or a passphrase. They can store that password in an encrypted vault so that they're inaccessible even if your computer is hacked. They can automatically fill that long password into your logon screen so you don't have to type it in, and then just log you into the site. And these password managers it makes life easier for you. It makes it easier and more secure at the same time. And I'll entertain some questions about those in a minute. Finally, have you heard about passkeys? It's finally a way to eliminate these passwords that we struggle with. They use a cryptographic token, and some websites are already enabling passkeys. Big ones like Apple, Microsoft, Google already have enabled passkeys. So it's coming. It's a slow process, but someday we'll be able to say farewell to these obnoxious passwords. But the rollout, meanwhile, is just getting underway. But another question is, where will you store the passkeys? And the answer is in a password manager. So this is another reason to get ahead of the curve, get started with a password manager now, because you're going to want to have one later, even when the passwords are gone and replaced by the passkeys. One last idea, and that is two-factor authentication. Even if you don't recognize the term two-factor authentication, you're probably already using it. Because when you use an ATM card, you use a PIN number, and that is a kind of second factor. Similarly, when a website sends you a 6-digit code in a text message, that's a second factor. So these are important to use whenever you have an account that has something in it that you care about. Microsoft did a study of all the emails that got taken over, that they lost control of, where the bad guys got into them. And 99.9% of all the compromised accounts used only a password for security. They did not have a second factor. In other words, two-factor authentication blocked out 99.9% of all the password hacks. 99.9%. So if you have an account with anything of value, use two-factor authentication on it. So now it's your turn for questions.
All right. One of the things that you had mentioned earlier is password managers. I think it would be good if you could elaborate on some of your suggestions to this group for password managers.
Sure. And the first thing I'll say is that any password manager is 1,000% better than no password manager. I'm a bit agnostic, actually, about the particular kinds of password managers. I just encourage you to get one. I've tried a number of them, and they all work pretty well. Let me think. What is the name of the one that I use? I'm going to have to look at my own computer to even look up the name.
Google it or duck it.
Yeah, just Google Password Manager, and you'll get a list of a dozen, and they're all good. It's not the technology in all of them is really helpful, and I can't recommend them highly enough. Other questions?
What do you think of password managers that share the passwords in the cloud and allow syncing across multiple devices?
Good question. There are, for starters, I do that. So I think that there is a small enough risk that it's worth doing if you have multiple devices that need to have your passwords. So I have a phone with a password manager that is synchronized to my computer. The key thing is that in password managers, these are encrypted so that even if the bad guys get access to the password manager company, they still don't have access to your passwords. Other questions?
While the microphone's going over there, I have a question about AI, and what I'm hearing about our VPN or encryption activity going away as AI starts to take over. Do you have any comment?
AI is not going to make VPNs go away. Those are going to continue to be an important security tool. AI is going to increase a lot of security risks, but the fundamental technologies like VPNs, like password managers, like passkeys, are not going to change, but we're going to be challenged in a lot of other ways, especially phishing by AI.
Thank you. Rob? Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, okay, use that one first.
Yes. My question is, a lot of the devices today, like my iPhone, iPad, etc., have face recognition for passwords. Is that a safe or good idea or not?
A really good question. And apparently some are better than others. Of course, if somebody knocks you over the head and then puts your iPhone up to your face, it's probably going to work. But generally, it's pretty safe. I wouldn't. There's not a single answer to your question, because the things that you care about the most from a security viewpoint are the things that you should protect the most. So, for example, I have entirely different security on my brokerage account than I have on my my Hulu account for streaming. I have multiple levels of security for my brokerage account. I actually use, in addition to two-factor authentication, I use a hardware key. So there's not a single answer. Going back to your thing about facial recognition, probably good enough for most things, but for the things you care about the most, don't rely on just one.
I have an Apple computer, and it has keychain that can automatically generate passwords for you that are long and very complex. Is that a good idea?
Yes, a keychain is an example of a password manager. It comes with Apple devices, and it's excellent. I recommend it, and good to hear that you're using it, because it will do all those things that I mentioned. It'll generate long passphrases. It'll put things into websites for you. Great stuff.